Hello everyone. Today I will be showing you how to name alkenes. So I will give about 5 examples of some of the common things you might see when naming alkenes for part 1, and then for part 2 and maybe a part 3 we will discuss more in detail how to name alkenes which have various functional groups as opposed to just alkenes with carbon chains. Okay, so if we take a look at this first molecule here, let's say we have this compound. Okay, so if we number our carbon chain, just like you would number the carbon chain of a normal alkane, for this one, our double bond is in the middle. So with our double bonds, if we only have a double bond and the rest are all carbons, we want the double bond to be closest to number 1. For this compound, since there are only 4 carbons, the double bond is in the middle, so it does not matter where we start naming. So I'll start here, we'll number 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so for this compound, we will have our base name, which is going to be bute. Bute because there is 4 carbons in the chain. Now, when naming alkenes via the IUPAC method, we have to identify where in the chain the alkene is. So we have our base chain, we have bute. Our alkene starts on carbon 2, so our number is going to be where the alkene starts. So it starts on number 2, so we're going to do bute-2, and then it's an alkene, so we will write ene. Okay, so now we have our base name, and we know that it's an alkene starting at carbon 2. However, with alkenes, we also have to indicate which side of the double bond your highest priority substituents are. So in this case, if we were to draw in our hydrogens, we would have a hydrogen here, and we would have a hydrogen here. So if we look at our priority groups, we have a carbon and we have hydrogen, and we're going to look down the line of the alkene, and then we have a carbon and we have a hydrogen. So for this molecule, both of the higher groups are the carbon groups because hydrogen is our lowest priority group. So carbon is going to have priority 1, and then hydrogen is going to have priority 2. For the left side of the alkene, for the right side of the alkene, we have the same exact thing. We have priority 1 on the bottom and priority 2 on the top with our hydrogen. Okay, with both priority 1s being on the bottom of the alkene, so the bottom of this line that we have drawn, we say that the 2 higher priority groups are on the same side of the alkene. So when our priority groups are on the same side of the alkene, we'll call them cis. And if we were to have priority groups, or the higher priority groups on the opposite sides of the alkene, that would be called trans. So cis, again, is highest priority, same side. And then trans is highest priority opposite. Oops, I cannot spell. Okay, so for our butene, the way we have it drawn here, We have our highest priority groups on the same side, so we will call this cis-butene. Now, this is technically a correct name for this compound. However, the IUPAC method of naming alkenes actually uses a different nomenclature. So for the nomenclature that we are going to use what is called EZ notation. And by doing EZ notation, instead of using cis-trans, when we have our highest priority groups on the same side of the alkene, this is going to be Z. And if we have trans, this is going to be E. And the way I like to think about it is we have our Z here, Z, same side. And then just remember that E is opposite. So if we were to write this compound using proper IUPAC notation, we would write Z butene. Then don't forget your dash here. Okay, so for this compound, our correct IUPAC name will be Z-butene. Okay, now that we have named a basic alkene, let's show the opposite of this. Let's show the trans-butene. So if we were to draw the molecule in this way, and we will keep our same numbering because, again, the alkene is in the middle. Therefore, it does not matter which end you start the numbering. Then for this compound, if we draw our line down the alkene, we see that our carbon is on the bottom on the left, whereas we would have our hydrogen here. And our hydrogen is on the top, so that gives us priority 2 up top and priority 1 on the bottom. Looking at the opposite side of the alkene, we have priority 1 up top and priority 2 on the bottom. So since they're on opposite sides, we're going to use the trans notation, or the E. So if we were to write this compound using the trans notation, we would write trans butene. Or if we're using proper IUPAC notation with the EZ, again, this would be E butene as such. Okay, now let's take a look at a slightly more complex molecule. Let's say we have a double bond in the middle. We have 2 methyl groups coming off of the one carbon in the double bond, and for the other one, the other carbon in the double bond will have a methyl group, and then let's say we have an isopropyl group. Okay, for this compound, again, we want our alkene to be at the lowest number in our carbon chain. So to number this carbon correctly, we'll start here. We'll label it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Again, we notice this is an isopropyl group here. However, for numbering our chain, we want the most amount of substituents, so we will not call it an isopropyl group. We'll break it up into our carbon chain. And then we will look down the line of the double bond. So looking at the left, the group on the bottom of the double bond is larger, has a larger mass than the group on the top of the double bond. So that will have priority 1. And the top will have priority 2 because methyl is smaller than an isopropyl group. Now looking at the other end of the alkene, we see we have a methyl group and we have a methyl group. They're exactly the same on both sides of the double bond. Therefore, for this molecule, we will not need easy notation because on one side of the alkene, the two groups are the exact same. There is no difference. Therefore, we cannot distinguish which version of the molecule we would actually have, cis-trans, because the two groups are exactly the same. Okay, therefore, for naming this compound, we will start with our base chain. So we have 5 carbons in the base chain. So we have pent. Again, pent is our base for 5 carbons. Our alkene starts at carbon 2 right here. So we will call this 2-ene. And now we have 1, 2, 3, 4 methyl groups that we need to include in our name. So how do we do that? We will do 2, my apologies, we will not count this methyl group because it's part of our chain. So we have 3 methyl groups, 2, 3, and 4. So for naming our methyl groups, again, we have to state how many methyl groups we have at those positions. So we have trimethyl. So this compound name will be 2,3,4 trimethyl-pent-2-ene. Again, we do not have to use cis or trans or our EZ because groups here are exactly the same. Okay, now that we have some basic names down for the alkenes, let's move on to yet another example. So for this example, let's try a ring. Okay, so for naming this compound, again, we have a cyclopentane ring with these 2 substituents. Now, how will we number our molecule? Again, we need to start with the alkene at the lowest number because right now we are only working with carbons. When we have other functional groups, this will change, but for the time being, we need to start with the alkene at the lowest number carbon. Remember that in a ring, you do not number the substituents of the ring. You only number within the ring, and then you label the substituents in the name. So in order to give the numbering for this compound, there are 2 different ways that we can number. We can start numbering at this carbon and number as such, or we can start numbering at the other end of the alkene. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So which one of these numbering methods is correct? Well, looking at the alkene, depending on which carbon we start at, we either start with our methyl substituent at 1 or our methyl substituent at 2. So when we have the option and we are not sure of what end of the alkene to start numbering from, then we look at our substituents and we want the option where the alkene starts where there's a substituent. So we're going to go with the red numbering. So I'm just going to mark these out so we don't think about them. Okay, so if we number this way, again, we have a ring with a pentene. So ring nomenclature, again, cyclo. We'll keep it consistent and keep it with the green for the name. So cyclo, pent. And then just like before, we have to label where the alkene starts. Now for this one, it's obvious that the alkene starts on carbon 1. This can be assumed without the number. However, following the correct IUPAC method of naming, we do still have to put in that is at position 1. So alkene or cyclopent 1-ene to show that the alkene is at carbon 1 in the ring. And then for the remaining part of the name, again, this will be similar to that of just normal alkanes. We have an isopropyl group at position 5, and we have a methyl group at position 1. Going based on the alphabetical order of the substituents, we will start with 5-isopropyl, and then we will go to 1-methyl. So 5-isopropyl, 1-methyl cyclopent, 1-ene. And that is the correct IUPAC name for this compound. Now we'll do one more for this video, and then we will do a part 2 of the video where we start adding in functional groups of the alkenes and understand the priority in naming between functional groups and the alkenes themselves. Okay, for our last molecule for this video, let's try naming this molecule. Okay. So for naming this molecule, again, we want to number our longest carbon chain. We only have one carbon chain in this case. So for this carbon chain, let's draw in our explicit hydrogens on the alkenes, as this will help in determining our notation. Okay, so for numbering the longest chain of this compound, we'll start at the left. Both alkenes are start at the 2 position in this molecule. So based on IUPAC standards, there are 2 separate names for this compound. We'll focus on the one starting on the left. So for numbering this compound, we'll number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So for our base name, we have hex. Hex is the base name for 6 carbons. Now, when we split up the name into 2 dienes, so we have a diene here, we have 2 alkenes. That's referred to as a diene in a molecule. So to make the name roll off the tongue better, we will add an A after our hex, and this will make the name flow just a little bit better when we say the name. Okay, so as before, we have to label the starting positions of both alkenes. So just like with substituents, we put both positions separated by a comma. So we'll have 2, 4. And then since we have 2 alkenes, just like if we had 2 methyl groups, we would put dimethyl. We will put diene for the molecule name. And then for the start, we have to label So we have no other substituents in the chain. That's good. So we have to label if the alkene at position 2 and position 4, if these two alkenes are E or Z. So if we look down this bond, and let's only focus on this one, we see that our priority 1 is on the top with the methyl. And again, hydrogen is always our lowest priority, so priority 2. And then we'll look at the other side of the alkene. We have all of this as priority 1. And just a lonely hydrogen down here for priority 2. So for the alkene starting at carbon 2, we will say that this alkene is Z because both priority groups, highest priorities, so priority 1s, are on the same side. So again, these go in parentheses. So we'll call this 2. So carbon 2 is Z. When you have one alkene by itself, you don't have to put the position in the EZ notation, but for this compound, since we have two different alkenes, we have to say which alkene is what notation. Therefore, we'll call it 2Z, separated by a comma. And then if we choose to look at our other alkene, so we'll look going down this bond, and we'll get rid of this. And we'll get rid of that. Oops. Okay, we'll leave those. So if we look at this alkene, we will see that one priority group is here on this side of the alkene. We'll get rid of these. And then our other priority group is up here. So again, looking across the alkene right here, we see that on one side, priority 1 is on the top and priority 2 is on the bottom. But on the other side of the alkene, priority 1 is on the bottom and priority 2 is on the top. So the notation for this alkene will be our E or trans alkene. So at carbon 4, we will call that E. And we'll close off our parentheses, and now we have our correct IUPAC for that compound. And again, just to remind you what it looked like before we made it messy. We have this compound. So we have 2Z4E hexa 2,4-diene. Okay, that will be all for this video. In the next video, I'll talk about naming alkenes with functional groups and how the functional groups play into the priority of the substituents when naming alkenes.